Marcus Johnson pulled his fishing gear from the back of his pickup truck, breathing in the fresh morning air that drifted across Pine Lake. The water sparkled like diamonds under the early sun, and he could hear the gentle lapping of waves against the wooden dock. This was his favorite time of day, before the world woke up and disturbed the peaceful silence. He had been coming to this same spot for 3 years now, ever since his grandfather passed away and left him the small lakefront property. The old man had bought the land back in 1987 when the area was mostly empty and houses were cheap. Now the lake was surrounded by million-dollar homes and perfectly manicured lawns that belonged to the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. Marcus worked as a mechanic at Johnson's Auto Repair, a shop his father had started 30 years ago in the nearby town. He wasn't wealthy like his neighbors, but he took pride in his work and loved the peace he found by the water. Every Saturday morning, he would drive the 20 minutes from his modest apartment to spend the day fishing from the dock his grandfather had built with his own hands. As he walked down the familiar path toward the water, carrying his tackle box and rod, he noticed a group of people standing near the community pavilion. They were dressed in expensive clothes and seemed to be having some kind of meeting. He could hear their voices carrying across the water, but he didn't pay much attention. The HOA folks were always having meetings about something. Marcus set up his chair on the dock and cast his line into the calm water. The morning was perfect, with just enough breeze to keep the mosquitoes away. He had brought his coffee in a thermos and a sandwich his neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, had made for him. She was one of the few people in the area who actually talked to him, always asking about his fishing and sharing stories about her grandchildren. About an hour into his peaceful morning, he heard footsteps on the wooden planks behind him. He turned to see 3 people walking toward him with serious expressions on their faces. The woman in front was tall and blonde, wearing a designer jogging outfit that probably cost more than Marcus made in a week. Behind her were 2 men in polo shirts and khakis, both looking uncomfortable but determined. The woman stopped a few feet away from his chair and cleared her throat loudly. Marcus reeled in his line and turned to face them, already sensing that his quiet morning was about to be interrupted. He had dealt with situations like this before, and he could feel the familiar knot forming in his stomach. "Excuse me," the woman said in a voice that sounded both polite and demanding at the same time. "I'm Patricia Whitfield, president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA. We need to talk to you about your use of this dock." Marcus set his fishing rod aside and stood up slowly. He was a tall man with broad shoulders, and he could see the men behind Patricia take a small step backward. He kept his voice calm and friendly, the way his grandfather had taught him to handle difficult situations. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm Marcus Johnson. Is there a problem?" Patricia's smile was tight and didn't reach her eyes. "Well, Mr. Johnson, we've had several complaints from residents about unauthorized use of community property. This dock is part of the Willowbrook Estates common area, and it's reserved for property owners and their guests only." One of the men stepped forward, adjusting his glasses nervously. "I'm Tom Bradley, HOA Vice President. We've been watching this situation for several weeks now, and we need to address it before it becomes a bigger issue. The residents pay significant HOA fees to maintain these facilities." Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice level. "I understand your concern, but I think there might be some confusion here. I've been fishing from this dock for 3 years without any problems. My grandfather owned property on this lake." Patricia's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "I'm sorry, but that's simply not possible. I've lived here for 8 years, and I know every property owner in this community. There are no black families who own lakefront property in Willowbrook Estates. Perhaps you're thinking of the public access area about 2 miles down the lake?" The third man, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Look, we don't want to make this difficult. We're just trying to follow the community rules. If you could just gather your things and find somewhere else to fish, we can all avoid any unpleasantness." Marcus looked at the 3 faces staring at him expectantly, waiting for him to pack up and leave like they assumed he would. He thought about his grandfather, who had worked 2 jobs for 15 years to save enough money to buy this little piece of paradise. He remembered the stories the old man told about the discrimination he faced, and how he had taught Marcus to always stand up for himself with dignity and respect. The morning sun was getting higher, and more people were starting to appear around the lake. Marcus could see a few residents walking their dogs and others getting ready for their own morning activities. Some of them had stopped to watch the confrontation, whispering among themselves and pointing in his direction. He took a deep breath and looked Patricia directly in the eyes. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern for the community rules, but I have every right to be here. This isn't community property and I'm not trespassing. However, I can see that you don't believe me, so perhaps we need to clear this up properly." Patricia's expression hardened. "Mr. Johnson, I don't know what game you're trying to play, but this harassment needs to stop. We have security cameras throughout the community, and we've documented your repeated trespassing. If you don't leave immediately, we'll have no choice but to call the police." The threat hung in the air between them like a storm cloud. Marcus could feel the weight of assumptions and prejudices that had led to this moment, the same assumptions that had followed him throughout his life. But he also felt the strength of his grandfather's legacy and the knowledge that he belonged here as much as anyone else. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet, his movements slow and deliberate so no one would misinterpret his intentions. The morning that had started so peacefully was about to take a turn that none of them expected. Marcus pulled a folded piece of paper from his wallet and held it out toward Patricia Whitfield. The morning breeze caught the edges of the document, making it flutter slightly in his steady hand. He watched as confusion crossed her face, followed quickly by irritation. "What is this supposed to be?" Patricia asked, making no move to take the paper. Her two companions shifted uncomfortably behind her, sensing that something was changing in the dynamic of their confrontation. "Property deed," Marcus said simply. "Signed and recorded with the county in 1987. My grandfather, Samuel Johnson, purchased Lot 14, which includes this dock and about 50 feet of lakefront access." Tom Bradley stepped forward and snatched the paper from Marcus's hand before Patricia could react. His eyes scanned the document quickly, his face growing paler with each line he read. The third man, who had introduced himself as Robert Chen, moved closer to look over Tom's shoulder. "This has to be a fake," Patricia declared before Tom had finished reading. "There's no way the county would have sold lakefront property to—" She stopped herself mid-sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Tom cleared his throat nervously. "Patricia, this looks legitimate. It has the county seal and everything appears to be in order. The lot number matches what's written here, and the coordinates place it right where we're standing." Patricia grabbed the deed from Tom's hands, her manicured nails leaving small creases in the old paper. She studied it intensely, as if she could make the words change by staring at them hard enough. Meanwhile, more residents had gathered around the pavilion area, watching the drama unfold from a distance. "Even if this is real," Patricia said finally, "there are still community standards and regulations that all property owners must follow. You can't just come here whenever you want without following proper procedures. There are rules about dock maintenance, fishing licenses, and guest registration." Marcus felt a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I have a valid fishing license in my tackle box if you'd like to see it. As for dock maintenance, I've been taking care of it myself. Last month I replaced 3 boards that were rotting and restained the entire structure. Check your HOA records for maintenance requests on Lot 14. You won't find any because I handle it myself." Robert Chen spoke up for the first time in several minutes. "Wait a minute. If you own property here, why aren't you paying HOA fees? Every lot owner is required to contribute to community maintenance and services." "Because Lot 14 isn't part of the HOA," Marcus replied calmly. "When the Willowbrook Estates development was planned in the early 90s, they tried to buy my grandfather's property to include it in the community. He refused to sell. The HOA was formed around existing lots, but Lot 14 remained private property with grandfathered rights." Tom was frantically scrolling through his phone, presumably looking up county records. His face grew more uncomfortable as he found information that confirmed Marcus's claims. He whispered something to Patricia, who became visibly agitated. "This is impossible," she muttered. "How could we not know about this? I've been HOA president for 4 years. I know every inch of this community." Marcus retrieved his deed from Patricia's hands and carefully folded it back into his wallet. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you know every inch of the HOA community. You don't know about private property that predates your development. My grandfather was fishing from this dock before half these houses were even built." A woman from the growing crowd of observers approached the group. She was older, maybe in her 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes. Marcus recognized her as Mrs. Eleanor Murphy, who lived in the big colonial house on the hill. "Excuse me." Mrs. Murphy said in a voice that commanded attention despite its soft tone. I couldn't help but overhear, and I feel I should say something. I've lived here since 1994, and I remember when they were building most of these houses. There was already a dock here when we moved in, and I used to see an older black gentleman fishing from it regularly. Patricia turned toward Mrs. Murphy with barely concealed frustration. Eleanor, surely you're mistaken. The community dock was built as part of the original development plans. No, dear, I'm quite certain, Mrs. Murphy continued. In fact, when my husband was having trouble with our property survey in 1995, he spoke with the gentleman at length about boundary markers and property rights. The man was quite knowledgeable and very helpful. His name was Samuel, I believe. Marcus felt a wave of emotion wash over him. That was my grandfather. He always said the neighbors around here were good people, once you got past their initial assumptions. The comment hit its mark, and Patricia's face flushed red. The other residents who had gathered were starting to murmur among themselves, and Marcus could hear fragments of their conversations. Some sounded embarrassed, others defensive, and a few seemed genuinely curious about the situation. Tom Bradley was still staring at his phone screen, shaking his head slowly. I found the original plat map for the development. Lot 14 is clearly marked as excluded from the HOA boundaries. There's a notation here that says, private property, existing structures to remain. Robert Chen ran his hand through his hair and sighed heavily. So what you're telling us is that we've been assuming this property belonged to the community for years, when it was actually privately owned the entire time. That appears to be the case, Marcus confirmed. My grandfather paid his taxes on this lot every year until he passed away 3 years ago. I've been paying them since then. The county has never had any questions about ownership or compliance. Patricia was clearly struggling to process this information. Her entire approach to the situation had been based on the assumption that Marcus was trespassing, and now that foundation had crumbled completely. She looked around at the other residents, many of whom were now staring at her expectantly. Well, she said finally, her voice lacking its earlier confidence, this is certainly an unusual situation. Obviously, we'll need to research this further and consult with our legal counsel to understand the implications for the community. Mrs. Murphy stepped closer to Marcus and extended her hand. Mr. Johnson, I'm Eleanor Murphy. I'm sorry for this misunderstanding, and I'm sorry I never took the time to properly introduce myself all these years. Your grandfather was a lovely man, and you're welcome here anytime. Marcus shook her hand gratefully, feeling some of the tension leave his shoulders. Thank you, Mrs. Murphy. That means a lot coming from you. But even as one resident extended an olive branch, Marcus could see that others were not ready to accept the new reality. Patricia and her supporters were huddled together, speaking in low voices and casting glances in his direction. The morning sun was getting higher, and what should have been a peaceful day of fishing was turning into something much more complicated. The next Saturday morning, Marcus arrived at his dock to find a surprise waiting for him. Someone had installed a bright yellow chain across the path leading to his property, with a large sign that read, Private property, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted. Below that, in smaller letters, was the Willowbrook Estates HOA logo and Patricia Whitfield's signature. Marcus stood staring at the chain for a full minute, feeling his blood pressure rise. The chain was attached to 2 metal posts that had been driven deep into the ground, clearly a professional installation that would have required permits and planning. Someone had invested considerable time and money into blocking his access. He pulled out his phone and called the county recorder's office. After being transferred twice, he reached a clerk who was willing to look up the property records while he waited on the line. Mr. Johnson, the clerk said after several minutes, I'm looking at Lot 14 right now. Your deed is clear and valid, and there are no restrictions on access recorded with the county. The path you're describing appears to be a legal easement that was established when the original survey was done in 1987. So someone blocking that access would be illegal? Marcus asked. I can't give legal advice, but I can tell you that interfering with legal property access is generally considered a serious matter. You might want to contact the sheriff's department about this. Marcus thanked the clerk and hung up. He walked around to examine the chain more closely and noticed something interesting. The metal posts weren't actually on his property at all. They were installed on the easement path, which according to his grandfather's survey belonged to the county as a right-of-way. Before he could decide on his next move, He heard car doors slamming in the parking area near the community pavilion. Patricia Whitfield was walking toward him with two men he didn't recognize. They were wearing business suits despite the early hour and warm weather, and they carried briefcases that suggested they were attorneys or some other type of professionals. "Mr. Johnson," Patricia called out as she approached. Her voice had the same fake pleasant tone as before, but now it carried an underlying edge of satisfaction. "I see you've discovered our security enhancement." "Security enhancement?" Marcus replied, keeping his voice calm. "You mean the illegal obstruction of county right-of-way?" One of the suited men stepped forward and extended a business card toward Marcus. "I'm David Kellerman, legal counsel for the Willowbrook Estates HOA. We've researched your claim regarding Lot 14, and while we acknowledge that you may have some ownership interest in that parcel, there are several legal issues that need to be resolved." Marcus took the card but didn't look at it. "What kind of legal issues?" The second attorney spoke up. "I'm James Morton, and I specialize in property and zoning law. The problem, Mr. Johnson, is that while your grandfather may have owned that lot in 1987, the subsequent development of this community has created complications. There are easement rights, utility access requirements, and community safety concerns that take precedence over individual property claims." "That's interesting," Marcus said, "because I just spoke with the county recorder's office, and they confirmed that my deed is valid and unencumbered. They also mentioned that blocking legal property access is against the law." Patricia's smile became more strained. "Mr. Johnson, we're not trying to prevent you from accessing your property. We're simply trying to regulate that access in a way that protects the safety and security of our community members. The chain can be unlocked for authorized visits provided you follow proper procedures." "Proper procedures?" Marcus felt his patience wearing thin. "This is my property. I don't need authorization from anyone to visit my own land." David Kellerman opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of documents. "Actually, Mr. Johnson, the situation is more complex than you realize. When the Willowbrook Estates development was approved by the county, it included comprehensive covenants and restrictions that apply to all properties within the designated area. Those restrictions were legally binding on all existing lots, including yours." Marcus had heard enough. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911, speaking clearly so everyone could hear him. "Sheriff's Department, please. I need to report an illegal obstruction of property access." The attorneys exchanged glances and Patricia's face went pale. Within 15 minutes, a sheriff's deputy arrived at the scene. Deputy Sarah Martinez was a woman in her 40s with graying hair and the calm demeanor of someone who had dealt with property disputes many times before. She examined Marcus's deed, looked at the chain and signage, and walked the boundaries of the easement with a surveyor's app on her phone. Then she spoke with each party separately, taking detailed notes in a small notebook. "Here's what I'm seeing," Deputy Martinez announced after completing her investigation. "Mr. Johnson has a valid deed to Lot 14, which includes legal access via the county easement. The chain and post are installed on county right-of-way without proper permits, which violates several municipal codes." Patricia stepped forward urgently. "Officer, surely there must be some consideration for community safety and security. We can't just have random people wandering through our neighborhood whenever they please." "Ma'am, Mr. Johnson isn't a random person. He's a property owner with legal rights. However," she turned to address the attorneys, "if you gentlemen believe there are valid legal challenges to those rights, you'll need to pursue them through the courts. In the meantime, this obstruction needs to be removed immediately." James Morton adjusted his tie nervously. "Deputy Martinez, removing this security measure could create liability issues for the HOA. What if there's an accident or incident on the property?" "That's not my concern," the deputy replied firmly. "My concern is that county right-of-way is being illegally blocked. The chain comes down now, or I start writing citations for municipal code violations." Marcus watched as Patricia reluctantly made a phone call, and within an hour, a maintenance crew arrived to remove the chain and posts. The entire process was documented by several residents who had gathered to watch, some taking photos and videos with their phones. As the crew worked, Mrs. Murphy approached Marcus again. "I'm sorry you're having to deal with this, Mr. Johnson. This isn't how neighbors should treat each other." "I appreciate that, Mrs. Murphy. I really do. But I'm starting to think some of my neighbors aren't interested in treating me like one of them at all." She nodded sadly. "Unfortunately, you're probably right about some of them, but not all of us feel that way. Change takes time, especially in communities like this one. As the maintenance crew finished removing the last of the posts, Patricia and her attorneys huddled together near their cars. Marcus could see them gesturing animatedly and knew that this confrontation was far from over. If anything, he had just escalated a situation that was likely to get worse before it got better. But he also felt a sense of pride in standing up for his rights and his grandfather's legacy. Samuel Johnson had taught him that sometimes you have to fight for what's rightfully yours, even when the fight isn't easy or comfortable. Looking out over the peaceful lake that his grandfather had loved so much, Marcus realized that this battle was about much more than just fishing access. It was about belonging, respect, and the right to exist in spaces where others didn't think he belonged. 2 weeks later, Marcus received a certified letter that made his stomach drop. The envelope bore the letterhead of Kellerman, Morton & Associates, the law firm representing the Willowbrook Estates HOA. Inside was a formal, legal notice demanding that he appear before the county zoning board to address multiple violations of community standards and potential safety hazards on Lot 14. List of alleged violations was extensive and creative. They claimed his dock was not up to current building codes, that his fishing activities were disrupting the lake's ecosystem, and that his presence was reducing property values in the community. Most seriously, they alleged that he was operating an unpermitted commercial fishing business from his property. Marcus read through the document 3 times, growing more frustrated with each reading. Every claim was either false or blown completely out of proportion. He had never sold a single fish, never brought more than 1 or 2 friends to the dock, and maintained his property better than most of the HOA members maintained theirs. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday at 2 p.m., which meant he would have to take time off work. As the owner of Johnson's Auto Repair, he couldn't afford to lose business, but he also couldn't afford to let these accusations go unanswered. He decided to fight back with the same level of thoroughness that Patricia and her lawyers had shown. He spent his evening researching county codes, printing property records, and gathering photographs that documented the condition of his dock and the surrounding area. He also called his insurance company to verify that his property was properly covered and compliant with all safety requirements. The day of the hearing arrived gray and rainy, matching Marcus's mood as he walked into the county building. The zoning board met in a sterile conference room with fluorescent lights and uncomfortable metal chairs. Patricia Whitfield was already there with both attorneys, along with Tom Bradley and 2 other HOA members Marcus didn't recognize. Board Chairman Robert Hayes called the meeting to order and reviewed the allegations against Lot 14. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who spoke in the monotone voice of someone who had conducted hundreds of these hearings. "Mr. Johnson," Chairman Hayes began, "you're facing several serious allegations regarding the use and maintenance of your property. Would you like to respond to these charges?" Marcus stood up, carrying a folder of documents he had prepared. "Yes, sir. I'd like to address each allegation individually, starting with the claim that I'm operating a commercial fishing business." He pulled out his bank statements for the past 3 years, highlighting every deposit to show that none came from fish sales. He also produced receipts showing that he regularly purchased fishing licenses and followed all state regulations for recreational fishing. "As you can see," Marcus explained, "I have never sold fish or operated any kind of business from my property. I'm a recreational angler who follows all applicable laws and regulations." David Kellerman stood up with his own folder of documents. "Mr. Hayes, while Mr. Johnson may not be directly selling fish, we have evidence that he frequently hosts groups of people for fishing activities, which constitutes a commercial use under county definitions." "What groups?" Marcus asked, genuinely confused. Patricia leaned forward in her chair. "We have photographic evidence of multiple individuals using your dock simultaneously, including children who were clearly not supervised properly." Marcus almost laughed out loud. "Are you talking about when my neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez brings her grandchildren fishing? Or when my coworker Dave brings his son to teach him how to cast? Those aren't commercial activities, they're just friends and neighbors enjoying the lake." Board member Janet Mills, a middle-aged woman with practical hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, reviewed the photographs Patricia had submitted. "These pictures show maybe 5 or 6 people maximum, and they all appear to be engaged in normal recreational fishing. I don't see how this constitutes commercial use." James Morton tried a different approach. The real issue, Mrs. Mills, is safety and liability. Mr. Johnson's dock is not subject to HOA safety inspections, and we have legitimate concerns about the condition of the structure. Marcus was ready for this argument too. He pulled out a professional inspection report he had commissioned from a marine construction company the week before. I had my dock professionally inspected last Tuesday. As you can see, it exceeds all current safety standards and is rated to hold up to 20 people safely. The inspection report was thorough and positive, noting that the dock was actually better maintained than many newer structures in the area. The inspector had specifically commented on the quality of Marcus's recent repairs and improvements. Chairman Hayes reviewed the inspection report carefully. This appears to be a very comprehensive evaluation. Are there any specific safety concerns that aren't addressed in this document? Tom Bradley spoke up for the first time. What about insurance liability? If someone gets hurt on that dock, the entire community could be at risk for lawsuits. My property insurance includes comprehensive liability coverage, Marcus replied, producing another document from his folder. The coverage limits exceed what most homeowners carry, and the policy specifically covers recreational use of the dock by guests. Board member Dr. Angela Foster, who had been quiet throughout the hearing, finally spoke. Let me ask a direct question. Mr. Kellerman, what specific county codes or regulations has Mr. Johnson violated? Not HOA rules or community standards, but actual county violations that fall under our jurisdiction? The attorney shuffled through his papers, clearly uncomfortable with the question. Well, there are building permit requirements for dock construction and modification. I have the original building permit from 1987, Marcus interrupted, pulling out a yellowed document. And I filed for a modification permit when I did my repairs last month. Everything has been properly documented with the county. Patricia was growing visibly frustrated. This is ridiculous. The man is clearly not a suitable neighbor for our community. Property values have already started to decline because of his presence. The room fell silent. Patricia's comment had crossed a line that even her own attorney seemed uncomfortable with. Dr. Foster's expression hardened noticeably. Mrs. Whitfield, Dr. Foster said slowly, are you suggesting that property values decline simply because of who owns neighboring property? Patricia realized her mistake but tried to backtrack. That's not what I meant. I was referring to the commercial activities and safety concerns. No, Dr. Foster continued. I think you said exactly what you meant, and I think we all understand what's really happening here. Chairman Hayes cleared his throat and looked around the room. Based on the evidence presented today, I don't see any county code violations or zoning issues with Lot 14. Mr. Johnson appears to be operating well within his legal rights as a property owner. This hearing is concluded. As people began filing out of the room, Marcus felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. He had won this particular battle, but he could see from Patricia's face that the war was far from over. Outside in the parking lot, she was already on her phone, presumably calling someone to discuss their next move. Mrs. Murphy, who had attended the hearing as an observer, approached Marcus as he reached his truck. You handled yourself very well in there, Mr. Johnson. Your grandfather would have been proud. Thank you. Mrs. Murphy, I hope this is the end of it, but I have a feeling it's not. She shook her head sadly. Unfortunately, you're probably right. Some people just can't accept when they're wrong, especially about something like this. As Marcus drove back to work, he reflected on how much his quiet Saturday morning fishing routine had changed his life. What started as a simple property dispute had revealed deep-seated prejudices and assumptions that he had hoped were becoming less common in modern America. But it had also shown him that there were still good people willing to stand up for what was right, even when it was uncomfortable. The harassment began 3 days after the zoning board hearing. Marcus arrived at his dock Saturday morning to find that someone had dumped a truckload of sand in the middle of his access path during the night. The sand was piled 4 feet high and stretched completely across the walkway, making it impossible to reach the water without climbing over it. He stood staring at the obstruction, feeling a familiar anger building in his chest. This wasn't just inconvenient, it was clearly deliberate intimidation. Someone had gone to considerable trouble and expense to send him a message, and that message was crystal clear. You're not welcome here. Marcus took photos of the sand pile from multiple angles, then called Deputy Martinez to report the incident. While he waited for her to arrive, He noticed several residents watching him from their windows and yard areas. Some seemed genuinely concerned, but others had expressions that suggested they approved of what had happened. When Deputy Martinez arrived, she examined the sand pile and shook her head in frustration. "This is escalating beyond a simple property dispute, Mr. Johnson. Whoever did this committed criminal mischief and possibly harassment. Do you have any idea who might be responsible?" "I have suspicions, but no proof," Marcus replied. "The timing seems pretty convenient, coming right after I won the zoning hearing." The deputy took a full report and assured Marcus that she would increase patrols in the area. However, they both knew that catching the culprits would be nearly impossible unless someone witnessed the actual dumping or came forward with information. Marcus spent most of his Saturday morning shoveling sand, filling wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow and dumping it in a corner of his property where it wouldn't block anything. The work was exhausting in the summer heat, and by the time he finished, his peaceful fishing day was ruined. The next Saturday brought a new surprise. Someone had scattered broken glass across the path to his dock, making it dangerous to walk without heavy shoes. Again, Marcus documented everything with photographs and filed another police report. Again, he spent his morning cleaning up instead of fishing. The pattern continued for 3 more weeks. Each Saturday brought a new form of sabotage: nails scattered on the path, a dead raccoon left on his dock, graffiti spray-painted on his property markers, and stolen equipment from his fishing setup. Each incident was reported to the sheriff's department, creating a growing file of harassment complaints. The situation began affecting Marcus's daily life beyond just his weekend fishing. He found himself constantly worried about what he might discover next, and he started having trouble sleeping. His work at the auto shop suffered, as he became distracted and short-tempered with customers. His neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, noticed the change in his demeanor and asked him about it. During one of their regular conversations, when he explained what was happening, she was outraged. "This is terrible, Marcus. This is not the America I came to find 50 years ago. You cannot let these people drive you away from your own property." "I don't want to give up," Marcus replied, "but I'm starting to wonder if it's worth all this stress and aggravation. Maybe I should just sell the property and find somewhere else to fish." Mrs. Rodriguez grabbed his arm firmly. "No, that is exactly what they want you to do. If you give up now, they win, and the next person who doesn't look like them will face the same treatment. Sometimes we must fight not just for ourselves, but for the principle." Her words reminded Marcus of conversations he had with his grandfather about the importance of standing up to bullies and not backing down when you're in the right. Samuel Johnson had faced much worse discrimination in his lifetime, and he had never given up or given in. That evening, Marcus decided to take a different approach to the problem. Instead of just documenting the harassment and hoping the sheriff's department would solve it, he would try to build allies in the community and expose what was really happening. He started by reaching out to Mrs. Murphy, who had been supportive during the zoning hearing. She was horrified when he described the escalating harassment and immediately offered to help in any way she could. "This behavior is absolutely unacceptable," she said during their phone conversation. "Patricia and her followers have gone too far, and decent people in this community need to speak up. I'm going to call some of my neighbors and see if we can organize some support for you." Mrs. Murphy was true to her word. Within a week, she had organized a group of 12 residents who were disgusted by the harassment campaign against Marcus. They included Dr. Foster from the zoning board, a retired teacher named Carl Hoffman, and several other longtime community members who valued fairness and decency over petty prejudices. The group decided to take action by attending the next HOA meeting en masse and confronting Patricia about the harassment. They also planned to demand that the HOA board publicly condemn the criminal activities and offer support for law enforcement investigations. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the community center. Marcus had never attended an HOA meeting before, since his property wasn't technically part of the association, but Mrs. Murphy convinced him that he should be there to face his accusers directly. When Tuesday arrived, Marcus was nervous but determined. He dressed in his best shirt and tie, wanting to present himself as professionally as possible. Mrs. Rodriguez offered to attend with him for moral support, and he gratefully accepted her offer. The community center was packed when they arrived. Word had spread about the confrontation that was planned, and nearly 40 residents had shown up to witness the drama. Marcus could see Patricia at the front of the room with her usual supporters, but he was encouraged to note that Mrs. Murphy's group was well represented and sitting together in a show of solidarity. Patricia called the HOA meeting to order with her usual authoritative manner, but Marcus could see tension in her posture that hadn't been there before. She clearly knew that tonight would be different from their typical discussions about landscaping and parking regulations. After reviewing the routine business items, Patricia opened the floor for community concerns. Mrs. Murphy immediately stood up, her silver hair catching the fluorescent lights as she addressed the room with the commanding presence of a retired school principal. I want to discuss the criminal harassment that has been targeting Mr. Marcus Johnson, who owns property adjacent to our community, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed room. For the past month, someone has been systematically vandalizing his property and making his life miserable, and I believe members of this community are responsible. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some people looked genuinely surprised while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Patricia's face flushed red as she tried to maintain control of the meeting. "Eleanor, that's a very serious accusation," Patricia replied carefully. "If Mr. Johnson believes he's been the victim of criminal activity, that's a matter for law enforcement, not the HOA. Dr. Foster stood up next, her medical training evident in her calm, methodical approach. "Patricia, I think we all know what's been happening here. The timing of these incidents, coming immediately after Mr. Johnson successfully defended his property rights, suggests a coordinated campaign of intimidation. This behavior reflects poorly on our entire community." Tom Bradley, who had been largely silent during the previous confrontations, finally spoke up. "Look, nobody here condones criminal behavior, but we also can't ignore the fact that having an outsider using our lake facilities creates legitimate concerns about safety and liability." Marcus felt his patience snap. He stood up slowly, his height and broad shoulders commanding immediate attention from everyone in the room. The conversations and whispers died away as all eyes turned to him. "Mr. Bradley," Marcus said in a voice that carried both strength and restraint, "I want to make something very clear to everyone here tonight. I am not an outsider. I am a property owner whose family has been part of this community longer than most of you have lived here. My grandfather bought his land legally, paid his taxes faithfully, and treated his neighbors with respect for over 30 years. He paused, looking around the room at faces that ranged from sympathetic to hostile to simply curious. What I've experienced over the past few months isn't about safety or liability. It's about the fact that some of you can't accept that a black man has the same property rights as everyone else." The room fell completely silent. Even Patricia seemed momentarily speechless in the face of Marcus's direct challenge. "I have documentation of every incident of harassment," Marcus continued, pulling out a thick folder. "Photographs, police reports, witness statements. Someone has been trying to drive me away from my own property through intimidation and criminal mischief. Tonight, I want to know if this HOA officially supports that behavior or condemns it." Carl Hoffman, the retired teacher, stood up and began clapping slowly. Soon, Mrs. Murphy joined him, then Dr. Foster, then others throughout the room. Within moments, more than half the attendees were applauding Marcus's statement. Patricia looked around the room with growing alarm as she realized that public opinion was shifting against her position. Several of her usual supporters were notably silent, and a few had even joined the applause. "This is highly irregular," Patricia protested. "Mr. Johnson isn't even a member of this association. He has no standing to address this meeting or make demands of the board." Mrs. Murphy stood up again, her voice firm with authority. "Patricia, Mr. Johnson may not be an HOA member, but he is our neighbor, and how we treat our neighbors reflects on all of us. I move that this board pass a resolution condemning harassment of any community member and pledging cooperation with law enforcement investigations." "I second that motion," Dr. Foster called out immediately. Tom Bradley looked around nervously at the crowd, clearly sensing the mood of the room. After a long pause, he spoke up reluctantly. "Given the seriousness of these allegations, I think we should vote on Eleanor's motion." Patricia realized she was losing control of the situation entirely. This is not how HOA meetings are conducted. We can't just pass resolutions based on unsubstantiated claims and emotional appeals. But the crowd was no longer listening to her objections. Someone called for a voice vote, and the ayes were overwhelming. Only Patricia and two of her closest allies voted against the resolution. As the meeting wound down, several residents approached Marcus to apologize for the treatment he had received and to express their support. A man named Steve Chen, who lived near the lake, even offered to help Marcus install security cameras on his property. "I've been watching some of the harassment from my upstairs window," Steve confided quietly. "I saw who dumped that sand on your path, and I'm willing to give a statement to the police if needed." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. Finally, someone was willing to come forward with concrete evidence. The breakthrough came 3 days later when Deputy Martinez called Marcus at work. "We made an arrest this morning," she reported. "Based on witness testimony and security footage from a neighbor's camera, we have enough evidence to charge Robert Chen with criminal mischief and harassment." Marcus was surprised by the identity of the culprit. Robert Chen was Tom Bradley's nephew, a young man in his 20s who lived with his parents in one of the expensive houses near the pavilion. He apparently had been conducting the harassment campaign at Patricia's suggestion, believing he was protecting the community from an unwanted intruder. The arrest sent shockwaves through the Willowbrook Estates community. Several residents who had remained silent during the controversy finally spoke up, expressing embarrassment about the harassment and support for Marcus's right to enjoy his property in peace. Patricia Whitfield resigned as HOA president 2 weeks later, citing philosophical differences with the direction of the community. Her resignation letter was read at the next board meeting by Tom Bradley, who had been elected as her replacement. "The board wants to make it clear," Tom announced to the assembled residents, "that harassment and discrimination have no place in our community. We extend our sincere apologies to Mr. Johnson for the treatment he received, and we pledge to do better in the future." 6 months later, Marcus was back to enjoying peaceful Saturday mornings on his dock, watching the sunrise reflect off the calm water of Pine Lake. The harassment had ended completely after Robert Chen's arrest and Patricia's resignation, and several neighbors had even made efforts to build genuine friendships with him. Mrs. Rodriguez often joined him for morning coffee on the dock, sharing stories about her grandchildren and asking about his latest fishing adventures. Dr. Foster had invited him to a community barbecue, where he met dozens of neighbors who had never bothered to introduce themselves before. Most surprisingly, Tom Bradley had apologized personally for his role in the conflict and had even asked Marcus for advice on maintaining the community dock structures. "You clearly know what you're doing when it comes to dock maintenance," Tom had admitted during their conversation. "Maybe the HOA could hire you as a consultant for our waterfront projects." Marcus declined the offer politely, preferring to keep his relationship with the HOA informal and friendly, rather than business-oriented. He had fought for his right to belong in this community, and now that the fight was over, he simply wanted to enjoy the peace and beauty that had drawn his grandfather to this spot so many years ago. As he cast his line into the morning stillness, Marcus reflected on everything he had learned during the months of conflict. He had discovered that prejudice and assumptions still existed in places he hadn't expected, but he had also learned that most people were fundamentally decent when given the chance to do the right thing. His grandfather's legacy lived on not just in the property deed and the carefully maintained dock, but in the principle that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of the color of their skin or the size of their bank account. Marcus had honored that legacy by standing up for himself and, in doing so, had made the community a better place for everyone who called it home.